The entire drive to the address for the soul stakes was taken up by the guys ribbing me about losing my headphones to Jaime. It was a serious matter, and all the jesting helped to alleviate the stress from what should have been a fatal mistake. The fact that I had left the moonpool room with just a hole in my leg and my pride badly injured was a miracle. "You have reached your destination." The GPS's schmarmy male voice heralded our arrival to the old Victorian-style home before us. A perfectly manicured lawn led up to the inviting porch surrounded by the cheery yellow of agrumony blossoms. The delicate chimes that hung by the door remained still despite the soft breeze that blew. "You see what I'm seeing?" asked Red. "A border of defensive herbs and a spirit chime? Yeah, I see him." Neil was our resident plant guru. He often carried a small pouch of agrimony with him, ever since we were sent to the Castle of Ghosts and Whispers to pick up a cursed bow and quiver. It was the only reason I knew of the plant. Neil claimed it had the power to banish evil spirits and deflect hostile magics. If it works, it works. I wasn't going to question the man. We all felt a little uneasy as we passed the spirit chime. When it didn't sing out a melodic tinkle, we all let out a collective sigh of relief. Spirit chimes are exactly what they sound like. They only chime when a spirit is present. Now that we knew nothing unseen had followed us, I reached toward the brass lion-headed knocker and gave it a thunk. Even with her milky white eyes, the woman that answered the door still sparkled with a beauty that had surely shone brightly in her youth. She smiled broadly at us. "Ah, you must be Kincade's boys. Had a brush with death today, did you?" Her blind eyes tracked down my body to my wrapped thigh. Mr. K's note flashed in my mind. Don't be fooled by her lack of vision. She still sees all. "Well, don't just stand there. Come in, come in." She gracefully moved to the side and gestured for us to enter. I expected to be taken to another era when we stepped over the entryway. I expected vintage furniture and knickknacks everywhere. I was sorely mistaken. The wood-planked floor gleamed in the afternoon light. The furniture was well loved, but surprisingly modern, and there were little to no baubles on any of the table surfaces. Not a doily in sight. "I may be old, but I'm not stuffy, boy," she harumphed at me. Was this lady really blind? Could she read my mind? Jackson cleared his throat. "Mr. K sent us to pick up some soul steaks?" The loud, amused chuckle that escaped her filled the room and was gone just as suddenly. "That man and his soul steaks. They're ceiling pillars." A wickedly mischievous grin spread across her face. "And they work like this." She picked a long dark column from a pile on her dining room table and threw it through the air. It rammed into Jackson, knocking him into the wall with a gasp. "What the hell, old woman?" "Ms. Ludwig!" shouted Neil, rushing toward the woman charging towards Jackson. She beat him to our heaving brother and gave a yank to his wrist. "There, there, be calm. Now, after you've pulled out their soul," she plucked the pillar from the floor where it had fallen, "you just jam it in like this." She threw the ceiling column again, but this time much harder, and it lodged into her wall. She turned and smiled brightly. Neil was crouched over Jackson, checking his pulse. He began to hyperventilate, and his eyes grew wide as he gave Jackson a small shake. "Dude! Jax! Please wake up!" Red had wandered to the pillar hanging from the wall. He looked from the pillar to Jackson and back before he erupted into a fit of laughter. Ms. Ludwig raised an eyebrow at him. "Can you see?" He just nodded his head in reply before facing the wall and raising his hand like he was waiting for the sheetrock to give him a high five. Red pulled a pillar from the wall and Jackson sat up on the floor. "Calm your tits, Neil." "That was awesome, Ms. Ludwig. You're a badass." She blushed softly, suddenly flustered. "You can call me Everarda. I see why Kincade collected you for now." Jackson helped a still sniffling Neil up off the floor. Her blind eyes roamed us curiously. "You've got strange auras, the four of you. Something unknown has touched the lot of you, just like Kincade. Now, do you understand how to use the pillars?" Yes, Miss Alvarado. Ma'am, I got it. We turned to Jackson, speaking over each other. The fuck you? How? What? He just grinned and said he'd explain in the car. Everarda examined each of us in turn. I'll take that as payment for the pillars. She pointed at my head. I froze stiff as she came at me, one arm outstretched. Her fingers were cool as they grazed my neck and slid into my hair. She winked as she pulled a small downy feather from my hair. Judging from its golden hue, it was one of Jaime's. Probably got there when she was messing with me earlier. What's that man want with a siren? She mumbled. The chimes on the porch tinkled. Oh, more guests! And with that, she shooed us from her home. Once in the car, we all started talking at once. Red raised his hand. Simmer! Jackson, you go first. Jackson nodded solemnly. She pulled my soul out of my body and pinned it to the wall. Red was the only one that could see me. It was surreal. Like there I was on the floor, with Neil bawling like a pussy over my body, but at the same time I was stuck to the wall. Gabe, you were just standing there with your mouth hanging open, waiting for flies. I was not bawling. You were. I love you too, bro. He clapped a hand onto Neil's shoulder. Maybe it's because I had a literal out-of-body experience, but seriously, I love you stupid idiots. We all murmured I love yous to each other like a bunch of saps. I had always figured that the four of us would die together. It never occurred to me that we could lose one and have to live with the hole they left. I swallowed down the strange lump that had formed in my throat. How are we going to pull a soul out of a body? 3 pairs of moist eyes turned to me. Red looked at his hand and then at Jackson and gave him a huge slap across the face. Jackson momentarily fell slack against his seat before jerking back up. You're a dick! Red just grinned and reached forward to grab at Neil, who slapped at him like a girl. Enough! Red, can you do it? I shouted. Yep. Think you could teach us? Maybe. Then let's go. I turned back to the steering wheel and started the car. My neck had begun to ache from being screwed around to look at the fools in the back seat. Neil threw a file at me. Glancing down, the coordinates showed it was close, only a day's drive, but not on the way home. Sighing, I pulled away from the house and the Mrs. Everarda Ludwig it contained. When she pulled me out, I could see her house for real. Like you should have seen the runes on the walls, Red. Could you see them? I've never seen some of the stuff she had. Red just tilted his head in thought. This is 100% bullshit. Red was pissed. He had tried and failed to lift the axe we had come to claim. Even if we get this thing to the car, it's not like we can just strap it to the top. I thought you did the research, Neil. I did. I well, I didn't think it'd be this big. We're gonna have to leave it and come back with a tow truck, I wheezed. I had definitely pulled something trying to remove the axe myself. Jackson was still doubled over laughing hysterically. The towering trees surrounding us swayed softly in the breeze. We'd hiked for hours to find this clearing. All we need, he chortled, is Babe. I'm sure an ox that big could just pull it out. He gasped for breath and held his stomach as the laughter continued to rock his body. What do we even need this bloody thing for anyways? The anger plastered all over Red's face was slowly giving way to a smirk of amusement as the corners of his downturned mouth twitched upwards. Paul Bunyan's axe is said to cut down anything in its path with a single swipe. Neil pushed up his sunglasses. Well, no shit. It's the size of a damn truck. Neil sighed. I figured the legend had exaggerated his size. I thought he was just an abnormally sized man. I didn't think he'd actually be a fucking giant. The ground began to shake as a deep rumble penetrated the air. What the fuck was that? We could barely stay on our feet as the earth trembled in giant concussions. Feels like footsteps. It did indeed. You don't think Paul Bunyan is actually still around, do you? I turned to Red. He was still pulling on the handle of the massive axe. A large snort of hot, sticky air knocked us on our collective butts. Guys! Neil pointed shakily in the direction the gust had come from. The largest ox I had ever seen, not that I've seen many, peeked at us through the tree tops. Its massive nose came barreling down at me, parting the trees. It snuffed at me and opened its mouth. I think it's mad. Please don't eat me. My voice came out much less masculine than I would have liked. Instead, the massive beast licked me. I was absolutely covered in gut-twisting saliva. Red stared up wide-eyed when the blue beast turned to him, still tugging on the axe. It brought its massive head down until one gleaming black eye was level with Red's head. "Babe?" His voice cracked. Two massive ears perked, and the beast swirled down in a blue mist into the axe, transforming it into a normal-sized axe, with a blade as blue as the ox had been. Holy hell! Red stared at the axe in his hand and hefted it at the closest tree. It sliced through like butter and sent the tree tumbling to the ground. "I think I need to change my pants," joked Jackson. "Gabe needs a bath. No way he's getting in the car like that. We'll strap him to the roof." We'd been home maybe 2 days, nursing our aching muscles, when Jackson came jogging into the room. "Two things," he said, coming to an abrupt stop. "One, we're going to Europe. Get your shit together. 2, I think the egg hatched." The egg had indeed hatched. We all gazed through the thick glass wall in wonder at the tiny wisp of a girl that toddled naked around the pool, with Thelxie and Jaime chasing after her. Fadarge watched from her nest. The little waif's long flaxen hair streamed out behind her as she skipped across the top water and stood before us, staring as curiously at us, and we stared, transfixed by her. The water rippled out from beneath her tiny toes. "Is she walking on water?" "Yep." She blew us a tiny kiss and ran back to Thelxie's waiting arms. "We're gonna need to buy her some clothes." The entirety of the plane ride to our destination in Europe, I contemplated the tiny Undine. She was lacking a fishtail, so not a mermaid. She seemed to like our pool, so not an oceanid or nearid who preferred salt water. That left Limnad or Naiad. I hoped for Naiad. Surely Mr. K hadn't pissed off a river god by stealing its child, Limnad. He hadn't stated where he was going when he had left that last time. All we could do was hope for Naiad. We could deal with a water nymph, but not a baby god. After landing in Germany, we took a chopper to our coordinates. As Jackson landed, I couldn't help but feel like something was horribly wrong. The castle was in ruins. Barely anything left as the dark flora around it had reclaimed the soil that was rightfully theirs. The others felt it as well. "Maybe it's got a dungeon," choked Red, hoping to alleviate some of the unease. "You shut your foul mouth, Red," growled Neil. He hated dungeons since our last trip to a castle. Jackson swung Miramasa's strap over his shoulder and checked his pockets for the blessed bullets. Red had grumbled the whole way, wanting to bring the axe instead of the returning dagger we'd found in Greece. You'll never guess, but when you chuck the thing at something, it returns to you. Neil carried a plain old machete, and I a Beretta. As we entered the ruins, the sun disappeared, sucked into the shadows like a secret. We were all on edge when we found a single standing door. "Fucking dungeons!" Neil swore, glaring at Red. Down and down and down we went, until we were swallowed whole by the old stone spiral staircase. The air was thick with the scent of mold and earth. Our flashlights barely permeated the dark in the cavernous room the stairs ended in. Old skeletal remains littered the floor, some chained to the walls in all manners of disarray. A single set of bones reclined in a throne-like chair. Standing with our backs to the closest wall, Jackson threw a holy smoker. A combination of sage, sweetgrass, holy water, cinnamon, and sea salt filled the room as the smoker fumed. Nothing. Not a single hidden rune responded, nor did any of the bones in the room quiver. The sinking feeling in my stomach told me this wouldn't be that simple. "You see anything, Red?" "No, but I don't like this. It's too easy." At the far wall of the cavern sat our treasure. Purple light bounced off the soul stone, bending the light from our flashlights around the room. The tiny rainbows looked sorely out of place in this dungeon of death. Neil cracked the resin flares and tossed them out into the room. The heady scent of myrrh and dragon's blood boiled out and lit the room. Still, no movement. We took up our battle positions, back to back, each of us facing a different direction, north, south, east, and west. Taking cautious steps toward our goal, we slowly arrived at the perfectly globe-shaped purple soul stone. What's it do anyways? Something to do with souls. Seriously, Captain Obvious? Tell me you actually read the file, asked Neil. No, I like flying by the seat of my pants into possibly deadly situations. Of course I read the file. Read? Jackson asked. Shit, I leave the nerd stuff to you. Gabe? I had gotten halfway through the file before my eyes snapped shut like a vice. Kinda? Most of it? Opening the leather rune bag, I tentatively reached out. As my hand got closer, the stone began to glow softly. Well, don't just touch it barehanded, Neil stated a fraction of a second too late. The bones scattered around the room began to rattle. I quickly dropped the stone into the bag. We watched in horror as 3 skeletons pulled themselves together. The one on the throne stood and stretched. Go, go, go! The bones moved surprisingly fast for not having muscles. Jackson fired Miramasa, and the skull of one exploded into dust. Another set began to pull itself together before the headless skeleton hit the ground. Shit, I won't have enough bullets! Red threw his dagger at another. The sharp blade flew through its rib cage and reappeared in his hand. I had 3 clips, 1 in the Beretta, 2 in my pocket. I began to count skulls as quickly as I could as I pulled my gun. Neil's machete severed one skull from its vertebrae. It tumbled down and rolled around the floor, gnashing its teeth at us, the body still reaching. I fired at the chattering skull and the body fell, another rising directly behind Neil. The throne skeleton raised a staff high into the air and slammed it down onto the cold stone floor. The flares burnt out. We were left in the pitch darkness, clamoring for our flashlights as Neil let loose a blood-curdling scream. There was a metal against stone clank before I could aim my light at him. He was on his back on the floor, trying to scoot away from the skeleton standing over him. His machete caught between its ribs. I fired and it fell. I could hear Red's dagger whizzing back and forth through the air. For each ghastly body that fell, another rose. The beams of light from our flashlights seemed weak in the unnatural darkness. Yes, we were underground in a cave, but this was the kind of darkness that seemed alive and very capable of clawing the light from your eyes, rendering you permanently in the dark. We weren't that far from the stairs, just a little farther. Something pulled at the hem of my pants, and I instinctively kicked my leg out. My foot hit something soft, and Neil cried out. There was a shk, and the bright light of a resin flare fought back the dark. Neil waved the flare wildly in front of him. I fired at the obscene skeleton stalking my friend from the dark. Neil, get up! I screamed. I can't. Don't let him touch you. Miramasa fired from behind me with an ear-shattering bang. I felt the icy pass it blew through my stomach and out into the knee of the throne bones. It collapsed and began to drag itself toward Neil, who scooted backwards frantically. Rushing forwards, I grabbed the back of his shirt and began dragging him towards the stairs. I tossed Jackson my Beretta, and he and Red covered us as best they could. Neil began screaming again. Red and Jackson were yelling and pointing behind me. I will never forgive myself for what I did next. Throne bones' skeletal fingers had grasped Neil's shin. He kicked and writhed as he tried to free himself of its grasp. I just stood there in horrified awe and watched as muscles, ligaments, and tendons began forming on the fingers and up the arm. Red shoved me out of the way and punted Throne Bones in the shoulder. The shoulder socket dislocated, and the arm came away from the torso, but did not let go. Just outside the light of the flare, other bones began to creep toward us. Snap out of it, Gabe! Jackson was screaming at me. I willed my body to move as Neil passed out. Red was still kicking Throne Bones, stomping on it and dancing out of its reach when it'd swipe at him. I leaned down and grasped at the wrist. As soon as our flesh met, my hand erupted into searing pain. Every molecule of me that touched it exploded in white-hot agony like none I have ever felt. I yanked as hard as I could and flung the damn arm away from us. The lower half of Neil's leg, as well as the flesh of my palm, went with it.